It was a quiet Friday evening in a small, peaceful neighborhood. The sun was setting slowly, leaving a soft orange light on the empty streets. A tall teenage boy walked home from basketball practice, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. He wore a gray hoodie over his school jersey, and the faint sound of music played from one earbud. His shoes scuffed lightly against the sidewalk as he walked, tired but happy after a long practice. He was thinking about what his mom might be cooking for dinner and about how good it would feel to finally rest. His home was only a few blocks away. He had taken this same route hundreds of times before. It was familiar and safe, or at least it used to feel that way. But this evening, something was different. A police car turned slowly onto the street, moving toward him. The bright headlights made him blink. Inside the car, two officers were talking. The radio had just reported a call about a suspicious person seen walking near the neighborhood. The description was vague, someone in a hoodie walking alone carrying a backpack. That was it. The younger officer looked out the window and nodded toward the boy. "That might be him," he said. The older officer frowned but didn't object. The cruiser slowed down, rolling beside the teen. The boy noticed them now. His steps slowed. He pulled one earbud out, unsure what they wanted. When the window rolled down, the officer's voice came out sharp. "Hey, you there! Come over here for a second." The boy stopped, confused but respectful. "Yes, sir?" he asked, stepping closer but keeping a safe distance. "What are you doing out here?" the officer asked. "I'm just walking home from practice," the boy replied softly. "It's right up the street." "Where exactly?" "Over there," he said, pointing toward a row of houses in the distance. "Can I see some ID?" He nodded and reached slowly into his pocket. His hands were shaking a little, not because he was hiding anything, but because he could feel the tension in the air. The officer's eyes were sharp, and he could sense they were already suspicious of him. "Hey, keep your hands where I can see them," the first officer barked. The boy froze. "I was just getting my wallet," he said quickly. "Move slow," the other officer warned. His heart started pounding. He did exactly what they said, pulling his wallet out slowly and holding it up so they could see. "It's right here," he said softly. The officer got out of the car. The sound of the door shutting made the boy flinch slightly. The officer walked toward him, glancing up and down as if trying to decide what kind of person he was. "Where you headed again?" "I told you. I live just up there," the boy answered, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer didn't seem satisfied. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. My mom and I moved here last year." "What's in the bag?" "Just my basketball stuff. Shoes, uniform, water bottle. Mind if I take a look?" The question didn't sound like a question. The boy hesitated. He'd been taught about his rights at school, but right now it didn't feel safe to say no. Okay, he murmured. He set the bag down slowly and unzipped it. The officer peered inside and saw nothing but clothes and shoes. Still, he didn't seem satisfied. "You sure this is your stuff?" "Yes, sir." The second officer came around from the other side of the car. He stood behind the boy now, one hand resting near his belt. The boy could feel him there without even looking. The air felt heavy, tight, like the whole world was watching. Across the street, a woman walking her dog slowed down. She looked at what was happening and quietly took out her phone. Another man nearby did the same. A few cars passed, some slowing for a moment before driving on. The flashing police lights caught attention, even though no one really knew what was happening yet. The boy swallowed hard. His voice shook as he spoke again. "Did I do something wrong?" "Just answering a call," the officer replied flatly. "You match the description." "What description?" "Don't worry about that. We're just checking things out." He wanted to say more, to tell them he'd done nothing wrong, that he was just trying to go home. But something in the officer's tone told him it was better to stay quiet. He kept his hands where they could see them. His breathing was quick now and his palms were sweaty. Then the younger officer stepped closer. "You live nearby, huh? You sure about that?" "Yes, sir," the boy said again. "My mom's at home right now. What's her name?" He said her name softly, hoping it would make a difference. It didn't seem to. The officer sighed. "Look, if you've got nothing to hide, you'll be fine. But I'm going to need you to stay still while we check something." He nodded again, his throat tight. He felt like he couldn't move or speak. The fear wasn't just about what was happening. It was about what could happen. Every second felt longer than the last. The older officer went back to the car to run his name. The boy stood there in the fading sunlight, surrounded by flashing lights and the quiet stares of strangers. He could feel the judgment in their eyes even though they didn't know his story. The younger officer kept watching him. "You nervous?" he asked suddenly. The boy didn't know how to answer that. "I guess," he admitted quietly. "Why's that?" "I don't know. I've never been stopped before." The officer gave a small shrug like it didn't matter. "Well, now you have." The boy's chest tightened. He wanted this to be over. He wanted to go home, eat dinner, and tell his mom about practice. But instead he stood there, his backpack open on the ground with police lights flashing behind him. Minutes passed. The officer in the car radioed something to dispatch, then looked up with a frown. "Nothing came up," he muttered to his partner. "Still doesn't mean he's clean," the younger one said. "Let's just make sure." The boy looked between them. "Please," he said softly. "Can I just go home? My mom's expecting me." "Not yet," the officer replied. A few more people had gathered now. Someone whispered, "What's he done?" Another answered, "Nothing. They just stopped him." The sound of voices made everything feel louder. The boy could feel his heartbeat in his ears. He wanted to cry, but he didn't want to give them another reason to think he was guilty of something. He kept standing still, doing exactly what he'd been told. Then, without realizing it, his fingers brushed the side of his phone in his pocket. He remembered what his mom had told him months ago. If you ever feel unsafe, press the emergency alert. It sends your location straight to me. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed the side button twice. The phone vibrated faintly in his pocket. His mom would know where he was now. The officers didn't notice. One of them turned toward him again. "Turn around for me." "What? Why?" the boy asked, startled. "Just do it." His breath caught in his throat. He turned slowly, doing what he was told. The officer reached for his handcuffs. The metallic click made the boy's stomach drop. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "He didn't do anything!" The older officer glanced up, looking uneasy. "Maybe we should wait," he muttered. But the other ignored him. "Sir, please," the boy said, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything." "I swear, stop talking," the officer said firmly. The boy shut his eyes for a moment. His mind went blank except for one thought. "Mom, please hurry." He didn't know how long he'd been standing there, but suddenly, in the distance, a dark SUV turned the corner, moving fast. It slowed only when it reached the flashing lights. The officers looked up. The car came to a stop just behind them. The door opened and a woman stepped out. Her movements were calm but powerful. Her suit jacket caught the last bit of sunlight. In one hand, she held something small and metallic that glinted under the light. It was a badge. The officers froze. The woman walked toward them, her voice steady and clear. "What's going on here?" she asked. Neither officer answered right away. She looked directly at her son, then at the cuffs, and her jaw tightened. "That boy," she said firmly, "is my son." The air went silent. Even the crowd stopped talking. The officers looked at each other, unsure what to do next. One of them started to speak but stopped when she held up her badge. "FBI," she said quietly. "Now I suggest you remove those cuffs." The younger officer's hand shook slightly as he reached for the key. The boy's wrists were freed and he took a deep, shaky breath. His mother stepped beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. She didn't raise her voice or shout. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. The officers stepped back, realizing what had just happened. The crowd began to whisper again, this time in awe. Phones kept recording as the mother turned toward the officers. "You stopped an innocent boy walking home from practice," she said quietly. "Do you see the problem now?" They didn't answer. The boy stood beside her, still shaken but safe now. For the first time all evening, he felt like he could breathe again. His mother led him toward her car, still holding his shoulder protectively. The flashing lights faded behind them as they drove off. He glanced out the window, his heart still pounding, realizing how close things had come to going wrong. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Neither could she. But both knew that moment, those few terrifying minutes, would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The sound of the police sirens still echoed in his head long after they were gone. When they reached home, the boy sat in silence beside his mother. She didn't say much either. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes showed a storm of emotions she was holding back. She had been trained to stay composed in pressure-filled moments, but this one was different. This time, it was her own child who had been standing on the edge of danger. Inside the house, the smell of dinner still filled the kitchen. The food had gone cold. She turned off the stove, sat down at the table, and looked at her son. He was still in his practice clothes, still clutching his backpack like he needed to hold on to something real. She noticed the faint red marks on his wrists from the cuffs, and her chest tightened. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. "Yeah, I guess." "You're not okay," she said softly. "You don't have to pretend." He looked down, blinking fast. "I just don't understand why it happened," he said. "I was just walking home. I didn't do anything." She wanted to tell him everything, about the system, about fear, about the way the world sometimes sees people before it knows them. But she also didn't want him to lose his hope. "I know," she said gently. "And you didn't deserve that." "None of it." He looked up at her, trying to read her face. "Would they have listened if you hadn't shown up?" She didn't answer right away. The truth was too heavy to say out loud. Finally, she sighed. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But that's exactly why things have to change." They sat in silence for a while. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. She could see the fear still in his eyes, the kind that doesn't fade easily. She reached over and placed her hand on his. "You did everything right," she said. "You stayed calm. You were respectful. You kept yourself safe." He nodded again, but tears started to fill his eyes. "I thought something bad was going to happen," he whispered. "I didn't even do anything wrong, but they looked at me like I was some kind of threat." Her throat tightened. She had faced danger before, real danger, but this was different. This was fear mixed with anger, the kind only a mother feels when she almost loses the most precious thing in her life. "You're safe now," she said quietly. "That's what matters." Later that night, she sat alone in the living room, replaying the scene in her head. The flashing lights, the fear in her son's eyes, the way the officers froze when they saw her badge. She had seen unfairness before, even inside her own department, but she had never felt it hit so close to home. For years, she had believed that if she worked hard, followed the rules, and earned respect, she could make a difference. But tonight reminded her that some people still judge before they understood. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a colleague who had already heard about the incident. "Are you okay?" "Is he okay?" it read. She typed back quickly, "We're fine. But this can't happen again." The next morning she woke early. Her son was still asleep, his bag resting by the couch. She made breakfast and sat down with a notebook. She began to write every detail she could remember. The time, the location, the officer's behavior. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew evidence mattered. If she wanted accountability, she needed the truth written clearly. By the time her son woke up, she had already made a few calls. The local police chief, an old acquaintance, answered her call personally. "I heard something happened last night," he said carefully. "Yes," she replied. "And I want to make sure it's handled properly," he sighed. "I understand. There's been some talk already. I'll look into it." "Not just look into it," she said firmly. "Fix it. I want those officers trained, disciplined, and reminded who they serve." "My son didn't deserve that." Her tone left no room for argument. The chief promised to follow up, but she knew words alone weren't enough. When her son came into the kitchen, still quiet and thoughtful, she smiled softly. "Eat something," she said. "You need your strength." He sat down and started to eat, though his appetite was small. "Are you mad at them?" he asked suddenly. She took a deep breath. "I'm disappointed," she said. "Mad won't change what happened. But telling the truth might." He looked thoughtful. "Will people believe us?" "They'll believe the truth," she said. "Even if it takes time." That afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was one of their neighbors, the woman who had filmed part of the incident. She looked nervous as she held up her phone. "I thought you might want this," she said. "I recorded what happened last night. It's all here." The mother thanked her. The neighbor nodded, saying softly, "It wasn't right. I couldn't just stand there." The video showed everything, the flashing lights, the boy standing still, the officer reaching for his cuffs. And then the moment the mother arrived, badge in hand, calm but commanding. It wasn't just a recording, it was proof. Over the next few days, the video began to spread online. First locally, then across social media. People were outraged but also inspired by the mother's courage and composure. The story wasn't just about what went wrong, it was about how she handled it. About how she turned fear into action. Reporters started calling. Friends and co-workers reached out. Some of her colleagues from the bureau told her quietly that she had done the right thing. Even though it might make waves, she didn't care about waves anymore. She cared about justice. At school, her son struggled with the attention. Some students looked at him differently, whispering about what they had seen online. Others came up to him and said they were proud of him for staying calm. He tried to focus on his studies, but some nights he still woke up from dreams of flashing lights and loud voices. His mom always came to his room when she heard him stir. Sometimes she didn't even say anything. She just sat there until he fell asleep again. One evening, a week after the incident, the police chief called back. "We've completed the review," he said. "The officers involved will be suspended and retrained. There will also be a public statement acknowledging what happened." "Good," she said simply. "It's a start." He paused before saying, "Your son's very lucky to have you." She hung up and looked across the living room at her son, who was sitting on the couch, watching the news. The story was already being covered. He turned toward her with a small, tired smile. "They're talking about us," he said. "I know," she replied, sitting beside him. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "I didn't want to be on the news. I just wanted to walk home." Her heart ached at his words. She put her arm around him. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes things happen so others can see what's really going on. You didn't ask for this, but maybe your story will help someone else." He leaned against her shoulder, finally allowing himself to relax a little. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" She looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "I hope so. Change is slow, but it starts when people stop pretending things are fine." A week later, a community meeting was held at the town hall. The mother was invited to speak. The room was full: neighbors, reporters, officers, and local leaders. She stood at the front not as an agent but as a mother. Her voice was calm, steady, but full of conviction. "My son could have been anyone's child," she began. "He did nothing wrong, but he was treated like he was dangerous. That should never happen. Not in this town, not anywhere." She didn't shout or accuse. She simply told the truth. People listened, really listened. Some nodded, some wiped away tears. Even a few officers in the back lowered their heads. After the meeting, people came up to her and thanked her for speaking out. The police chief shook her hand and promised again that training and policy changes were coming. She didn't know how much would really change, but for the first time, it felt like someone was finally paying attention. That night, she and her son walked home together under the streetlights. The same sidewalks, the same neighborhood, but it didn't feel quite as heavy anymore. They didn't talk much, just walked side by side, the cool air quiet around them. When they reached home, he looked up at her and said softly, "I'm glad you came when you did." She smiled faintly. "I'll always come for you," she said, "no matter what." He nodded, understanding more now than he ever had before. The world could be unfair, but he also knew there was strength in truth, in calm, and in courage. That night, he fell asleep a little easier. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, though it never quite felt the same. But both of them knew something important had changed, not just in their lives, but in the hearts of everyone who had seen what happened. And that, she thought, was how real change begins. Days passed, but the memory of that night didn't fade. The boy tried to go back to his normal routine: school, basketball, homework, but nothing felt the same anymore. Every time he saw a police car, his stomach tightened. He started walking a different route home, even though it took longer. He told his mom he just liked the scenery, but she knew better. She could see the way he looked around more now, always alert, always cautious. His mother noticed the changes quietly. She didn't want to push him, but she also didn't want him to live in fear. Every night after finishing her reports, she would sit at the kitchen table and think about how to help him heal. She had faced dangerous cases in her career, but nothing had shaken her like seeing her own son being treated like a suspect. One evening, she came home earlier than usual. He was sitting on the couch staring blankly at the TV. The sound was on, but he wasn't really watching. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence, but not so close that it made him uncomfortable. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently. He shrugged. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that," she replied softly. "But I can tell you're not." He hesitated, then said, "It's just, I keep thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see those lights. I hear their voices. It's like it's still happening." She nodded slowly, understanding more than he realized. "That's normal," she said. "What you went through was scary, but you can't let it define you." He looked at her. "How do you do that?" How do you see bad things and not let them change who you are? She smiled faintly. You learn to turn fear into focus. You remind yourself that fear only wins if you stop moving forward. He thought about that for a moment. So what should I do? Start living again, she said. Play your game. Laugh with your friends. Walk tall. Don't let them take away your peace. He nodded, but deep down he still wasn't sure if he could. Trust didn't come back overnight. The next weekend, his basketball coach called. The team had an upcoming tournament, and they needed everyone on board. At first, he thought about saying no. He didn't feel ready to face crowds or noise, but his mom encouraged him. Go, she said. Do it for yourself. You need something good again. So he agreed. On the day of the game, she drove him to the gym. He was quiet the whole ride, staring out the window. She didn't try to fill the silence. When they reached the parking lot, she turned to him and said, No matter what happens out there, just remember you belong. You have nothing to prove. He nodded, grabbed his bag, and headed inside. As soon as he stepped onto the court, something inside him felt different. The smell of the gym, the sound of sneakers on the floor, the bounce of the ball. It was all familiar. For the first time in days, he felt normal again. He stretched, warmed up, and by the time the game started, his nerves had started to fade. His mother sat in the stands, watching quietly. Every time he ran down the court, she felt her chest fill with pride. He wasn't just playing. He was healing. When he scored his first basket, she clapped softly, smiling. It wasn't about winning. It was about finding himself again. After the game, he ran up to her, sweaty and smiling for the first time in weeks. Did you see that shot? He asked, his eyes lighting up. I saw it, she said, smiling back. You played great. He nodded, breathing hard. It felt good. I'm glad, she said. You needed that. As they drove home, she looked over at him and thought about how strong he was becoming. The fear hadn't vanished, but it wasn't in control anymore. That night, she felt a small piece of peace return to their home. A few days later, she received an unexpected call from her supervisor at the bureau. We're hosting a youth outreach event next week, he said. It's about building trust between law enforcement and the community. I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak. She hesitated. You mean share what happened? If you're comfortable, he said. People need to hear from someone who's lived it. That night, she mentioned it to her son. He looked unsure. Are you sure you want to talk about it? He asked. Yes, she said. It's time. Maybe it can help someone else. The following week, the event was held in a large hall filled with students, parents, and police officers. She stood at the front, microphone in hand. Her son sat near the back, listening. I'm not here today as an agent, she began. I'm here as a mother. The room went silent. A few weeks ago, my son was stopped by officers who thought he looked suspicious. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just walking home. People murmured quietly. The officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. She continued. I don't share this to shame anyone, but to remind us that we can do better. Every young person deserves to feel safe, no matter what they look like or where they live. Her voice stayed calm but strong. My son did everything right. He was polite. He followed directions. But still he was treated like he didn't belong. And as a mother, that's something I'll never forget. She paused, scanning the crowd. But I don't want this story to just make people angry. I want it to make people think. I want it to start conversations that lead to change. When she finished, the room erupted in quiet applause. Her son sat still for a moment, processing her words. Then he stood up and clapped too, proud of her and proud of himself for being strong enough to live through it. After the event, a few officers approached her. One of them said softly, Thank you for sharing that. We need to hear it more often. Another added, Sometimes we forget what it feels like on the other side. Your story reminded us. On the ride home, her son said, You were amazing, she smiled. So were you. You inspired this. He looked out the window. Do you think it really makes a difference? She nodded. Maybe not all at once, but one conversation at a time, it starts to matter. Weeks went by and life slowly began to settle into a new kind of normal. People still talked about their story, but it wasn't just about what happened anymore. It was about what came after, the strength, the message, the hope. One afternoon, she got a letter in the mail from a local high school student. The girl wrote, I used to be scared of police, but after hearing your story, I realized some people inside the system want to make things better. Thank you for giving me hope. She showed the letter to her son, and he smiled. "That's pretty cool," he said. "It is," she agreed. "Sometimes the hardest moments bring the strongest change." That weekend they visited the park together. It was sunny, kids were laughing, and for the first time in a long time they both felt light again. He shot hoops with a few younger kids, teaching them tricks and cheering when they made a shot. She sat on a bench watching, proud and thankful. When they left the park, he said, "I think I finally get what you meant, about not letting fear win." She smiled and put her arm around him. "That's my boy," she said softly. As they walked home side by side, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was peaceful this time, not full of fear but full of strength. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had already learned how to face it, together. Months had gone by since the night everything changed. The boy had grown stronger in quiet ways. He laughed more now, went out with his friends, and focused on school again. But deep down there were still small pieces of him that carried that night's memory. Sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night, his heart racing, unsure why. Other times a sudden siren in the distance made him stop and catch his breath. He was healing, but healing wasn't a straight path. His mother knew it too. She could see the moments when his smile faded just a little too quickly. She never forced him to talk, but she was always there. They had both learned how to read silence, how it could speak just as loud as words. One afternoon he came home from school looking different. Not sad exactly, but serious. He dropped his backpack on the couch and stood quietly for a moment. "Everything okay?" his mom asked, setting her coffee cup down. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, Something happened today." She tilted her head, waiting. "At lunch, some of the guys were talking about that night," he said. "I didn't even tell them everything, but I guess people heard about it from the event you spoke at." She felt her stomach tighten slightly. "What did they say?" He shrugged. "Some of them said it was brave what you did, but a couple of others said I probably looked suspicious and that's why it happened. They weren't being mean, just like they didn't get it." His mother took a slow breath. "That must have been hard to hear." He nodded. "Yeah. It made me feel like I had to explain myself again, like I did that night." She stood up, walked over, and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You don't owe anyone an explanation. People see the world through their own experiences. Some just haven't lived what you have." He looked up at her. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" "Maybe," she said softly. "But it starts with people like you. People who keep showing up, keep being themselves even when others don't get it." That night, she stayed up late again, sitting by the living room window. The streetlights glowed softly outside, and she could hear the faint hum of cars passing. Her thoughts drifted between pride and worry. She had always been strong, but being strong for her son had taught her something new. That strength wasn't about hiding fear. It was about facing it together. A week later, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from a community center nearby. They were organizing a local mentorship program for teens and wanted her son to join. "We think he could be a great role model for younger kids," the message said. She smiled as she read it. That evening, she mentioned it to him. He looked surprised. "Me, a mentor?" "Yes," she said. "You've been through things that could help others. Sometimes kids listen better to someone their age than to adults." He thought about it. "What would I even say to them?" "Just tell them what you've learned," she said. "About courage, about not letting fear control you." "That's enough." He hesitated but agreed to try. The next week, he attended the first meeting. There were about 10 kids, some younger, some around his age. They sat in a circle, shy at first, waiting for someone to speak. He looked around and realized most of them probably had their own stories, some that no one ever asked to hear. So he began quietly at first, then with more confidence. He told them about a night that changed how he saw the world. He didn't go into too much detail, but he talked about fear, and how easy it was to feel powerless and how he learned to keep moving anyway. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then one of the younger boys said, "That happened to my brother too." Another nodded, saying, "I always feel nervous walking home when it gets dark." He realized then that he wasn't alone, and neither were they. From that day on, he kept attending the sessions. Every week he spoke with the kids, listened to their worries, shared bits of his story, and laughed with them. The center became a place of hope, a small space where fear lost its grip. His mother often watched from a distance, proud but quiet. She didn't want to interrupt what he was building. It wasn't just about recovery anymore. It was about turning pain into purpose. One evening after a session, the program director approached her. "Your son has something special," she said. "He listens." "That's rare," the mother smiled. "He's been through enough to understand what silence really means." As weeks turned into months, life began to feel balanced again. School events, basketball games, and family dinners filled their days. The shadow of that night still lingered, but it no longer ruled them. One morning, while she was getting ready for work, her phone rang again, this time from the police department. Her heart skipped for a second, then steadied. The officer on the line introduced himself politely. "Ma'am, I just wanted to let you know that the officers involved that night have completed a full review and additional training sessions. Your story actually helped shape some of the new community guidelines." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for letting me know," she said. When she hung up, she felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and pride. Her son's story had actually changed something. Maybe not everything, but enough to matter. That evening, she told him what she'd learned. His eyes widened. "Wait, they changed things because of what happened to us?" She nodded. "Yes, our story helped open some eyes." He leaned back on the couch, thoughtful. "That's kind of amazing." "It is," she said. "Sometimes it takes something painful to start real change." Later that week, they attended another community event, this one organized by both police and local youth. The atmosphere was lighter this time, hopeful. Officers played basketball with the kids, laughed, and listened. There were no speeches, no tension, just connection. Her son joined one of the games. She watched as he dribbled past one of the officers, scoring easily. The crowd laughed and cheered. Even the officer smiled, giving him a high five. It was such a simple moment, but it meant everything. Afterward, the police chief approached her quietly. "You've done more than you realize," he said. "Your courage helped us see where we could do better." She smiled modestly. "All I did was protect my son," he nodded. "And in doing that, you helped protect others too." On their way home that night, the air was cool and the city lights shimmered in the distance. Her son rolled down the window, letting the wind hit his face. "I think I finally feel okay again," he said softly. She turned to him. "You deserve to," he smiled. "You too, Mom." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind that came after peace had finally settled in. Over the next few months, they kept moving forward, slowly, steadily, together. The story that once brought pain had become a source of purpose. She continued her work with the Bureau, focusing more on community outreach. He stayed involved with the mentorship program, and even spoke at his school about resilience and respect. One day, he came home holding a small flyer. "They're having an essay contest about community change, Koyu," he said. "I'm thinking of writing about us." She smiled, her eyes softening. "You should. Tell your truth. People need to hear it." He spent nights working on it, writing and rewriting. When he finally turned it in, he felt nervous but proud. A few weeks later, his school called to say he had won. His essay would be published in the local paper. The morning it came out, she unfolded the paper and read his words. He had written, "Sometimes the hardest moments show us who we really are. Fear can change people, but so can hope. My mom taught me that standing tall doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you choose to keep going anyway." Tears filled her eyes as she read it. She looked at her son sitting across the table, pretending to be casual but smiling quietly. "You did it," she said softly. He grinned. "We did it." That night they sat together in the living room. The house was calm, filled with the soft sound of laughter from the TV. It wasn't just another evening. It was the kind of peace that comes after surviving a storm. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt free. The world outside hadn't completely changed, but their world had. And that was enough for now. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, but both mother and son knew it would never be exactly the same as before that night. The boy walked home from school with his head held higher, not because he was fearless, but because he had learned how to carry courage alongside fear. His mother watched him from the window, proud of the resilience that had grown in him. She had always known he was strong, but the events of the past months had shown them both just how deep that strength went. The mentorship program continued to thrive, with the boy now taking a more active role. He led small discussions, played basketball with the younger kids, and shared lessons about facing fear with courage. Each session was a reminder that even one person's story could touch many lives. The children he guided began to trust him, not just as a mentor, but as someone who truly understood them. At home, evenings were quieter now. They shared dinners, homework, and talks about the day. His mother still worked long hours, but they made sure to carve out time for each other. The boy began to open up more, not just about what happened that night, but about school, friends, and dreams for the future. He had started writing in a journal, describing not only his challenges but also his small victories. His mother read some of his entries when he allowed, seeing the world through his eyes, learning alongside him. One afternoon, as the leaves turned golden with the change of seasons, he came running into the kitchen waving a letter. "Mom, I got invited to speak at a city youth conference." She looked at him in surprise. "Really? That's incredible. What will you be talking about?" "About fear and courage," he said. "About what I learned that night and how it changed me." She felt a mix of pride and nervousness for him. Standing in front of a large crowd wasn't easy, especially to tell such a personal story, but she knew he could do it. She hugged him tightly. "You'll inspire so many people. Just speak from your heart." When the day of the conference arrived, he stood backstage, heart pounding, clutching his notes. He felt the familiar nervousness creeping in, but he remembered everything he had learned in the past months. Fear didn't disappear, but he had learned to move forward in spite of it. His mother gave him a reassuring nod from the front row. He took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The room was filled with teens, parents, and community leaders. Cameras were set up to stream the event. He looked out at the faces, some curious, some skeptical, some familiar. He took a moment to center himself and began to speak. "I want to share a story," he said, voice steady at first. "A story about a night that changed my life. I was walking home just like I always did when I was stopped by police. I had done nothing wrong, but I was treated like I was dangerous. I was scared, confused, and alone. But then my mom arrived, calm and strong. She reminded me that courage doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you keep moving forward anyway." He paused, seeing the faces in the audience soften, listening closely. "That night taught me a lot. It taught me to stay calm, to stand tall, and to trust in those who care about me. And it taught me that my story, my experience, can help others. I want to help kids who feel scared or unsafe. I want to show them that they have a voice and that their courage matters too." The audience was silent for a moment, then began to applaud. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a recognition of truth, resilience, and hope. People approached him afterward, thanking him for speaking, sharing their own stories, and asking for advice. He realized that his voice could reach further than he had ever imagined. Back at home, he sat beside his mother after the conference, exhausted but exhilarated. "I didn't know I could do that," he said. "You did it because it mattered," she said softly. "And because you believed in yourself." Weeks turned into months, and the boy's confidence grew. Schoolwork became easier to focus on. Basketball felt fun again, and his relationships with friends deepened. The mentorship program expanded, with more teens joining, eager to hear his story and learn from his experiences. He had found a purpose, a way to turn fear and pain into something meaningful. His mother continued her work at the Bureau, often sharing insights from her experiences and encouraging community programs. She became more vocal in her advocacy for youth and fair policing. Their story had gained attention beyond the local area, inspiring conversations in schools, community centers, and even law enforcement training sessions. They were no longer just survivors. They were leaders and educators. One quiet evening, they sat on their porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The boy leaned against his mother, feeling the comfort of home and the strength of their bond. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" he asked.